Okay, everyone. Hello. It is Tuesday, May 13th, I think. I'm not totally sure. Sorry, I had a very late day at work yesterday and I'm still quite tired. But want to do a video we've come to the end of the Rasputitsa in Ukraine, which means the muddy season is ending and the summer campaign season is upon us. Russia has been building up their forces. Several weeks ago, Vladimir Putin put out a decree to conscript, was 160,000 more men. So I am definitely in the camp that thinks another major Russian summer offensive is coming. I am also of the group that thinks that this will be their last major offensive because they're simply running out of equipment with which to prosecute this war. So it begs the question right now, as there are negotiations going on and, Tucker Carlson's out there and Ian Miles Chong and others, just, Tim Pool talking all day, every day about how awesome Russia is. How strong is Russia really? And the answer is it's a very confusing question, and here's why. Here's why Russia is strong. Russia has enormous reserves of oil and natural gas. They have huge mineral reserves. They control an enormous amount of territory. They have a fairly large population, around 140 million or so. Obviously, that's well less than half the population of the United States and a tiny fraction of countries like India or China, but still it's a lot bigger than most countries. They have an economy worth around $2 trillion, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. And above all else, they have the world's second largest stockpile of nuclear weapons. They have the largest army in Europe. So when you start hearing all that, it sounds like Russia's a fairly powerful country. And in some ways they are. When you have 5,000 nuclear weapons and huge reserves of oil and natural gas, as well as a fair amount of things like coal and uranium, you're going to have some power. When you have a large conventional army, even if it's corrupt and badly trained and badly led and badly equipped, it still has a lot of size. You're going to have some power. But that also belies how weak of a country Russia is. Yes, their population is rather large compared to most countries, but for instance, the United States by itself has over 180 million more people than Russia does. Russia's population is older than the American population. It is much less healthy, much higher rates of things like tuberculosis and HIV, very high suicide rates, very high alcoholism rates. They die at a much younger age than Americans do. They tend to not be as well educated. While they have a fairly good number of people, it is an old, sick population. It is also a population that is rapidly shrinking. Based on the latest data from January and February, they're shrinking at around 50 to 55,000 people per month. So, figure each month, 50 to 55,000 fewer Russians than there were the month before. So this is a very unhealthy, rapidly aging, rapidly shrinking population. Their economy, okay, $2 trillion. Well, that sounds okay, but compared to what? It is obviously a tiny fraction the size of the United States or Chinese economies. It's about 1/13 the size of the American economy. But for instance, it is less than half the size of the German economy. It's roughly half the size of the Japanese economy. It is smaller, considerably smaller than the French economy by over $1 trillion in GDP. It is roughly on par with the economy of Italy. It is only a little bit bigger than the economy of the state of Florida. And keep in mind, Florida has 1/7 the number of people, and our statewide GDP is, not that far off from the Russian GDP. That ought to give you some idea of how bad a shape their economy is in. Their industrial plant is badly aging. They cannot produce any of their own machine tool. They have to import 98% of it. They are incredibly dependent on China. China is their largest export market for oil, for natural gas, for fertilizer. Now, in and of itself, that's not a bad thing, but it does create a huge level of dependence, so much so that the Russians have been begging the Chinese to help them build what's called Power of Siberia 2, which is a new natural gas pipeline to go from Siberia into China. There's already a Power of Siberia 1. The reason they've been begging the Chinese for 4 or 5 years for this is the Russians can neither finance it, nor do they have the technical ability to build it themselves. So they have a lot of natural gas, and they cannot build a pipeline to a country that is the largest importer of natural gas in the world. China will not build it for them. You might think, well, wouldn't China do this? They need natural gas. It's right there. Why not take it? The reason is because of the Ukraine war. The Chinese have viewed and have commented very publicly on how Russia has used countries like Germany, their dependence on Russian natural gas as ways to obtain political leverage over them. And so they've basically said, we're just not going to import any more energy from Russia because we don't want to become overly dependent on them, which is very smart by the Chinese, I might add. Russia is at the point of begging the Chinese for pipelines, and the Chinese are saying no, and the Russians can do nothing about it. The Russians cannot force the Dardanelles. They cannot get their military vessels in or out of the Black Sea. Turkey controls it. Turkey won't let them in or out. There's absolutely nothing Russia can do about it. The Finns have commandeered, Finland in the Baltic has commandeered some of their vessels, and again, the Russians can do nothing about it because they don't have the strength to. Obviously, the Russian army is bogged down in Ukraine. They've been fighting for years. They've lost hundreds of thousands of men. So as a military power, while yes, they have a very large supply of nuclear weapons, their conventional forces frankly suck. They are badly equipped, they are badly led, they are badly trained, and they are very corrupt. A big part of what made Russia appear very strong was they had this huge stockpile of old Soviet-era equipment, tanks and artillery and armored vehicles. It was very old, it was in very poor condition, but they had huge quantities of it. So it was low quality, high quantity. All that's gone now. It's all been blown up on the fields of Ukraine. So as a conventional military nation, on paper, they have a very large army, but it is a very, very poor quality army, and everybody knows that. Politically, they're extremely isolated. They're very much a pariah state. Kind of going back to the economic side, the ruble is not internationally tradable right now. You cannot use a ruble if you want to buy something on the international market outside of a few very exceptional circumstances. The last time Russia hosted the BRICS conference, which was several months ago, the Russians actually put in the packet, you have to bring dollars or euros, because that was all the Russians would take for currency, because the Russians are starving for dollars and euros. So how strong of a country is that? So the point of all this is, how strong of a country is Russia is a question that depends on exactly what type of answer you're looking for. They have a lot of nuclear weaponry. They have a lot of mineral wealth. They control an enormous amount of territory. And they certainly have a willingness to engage in brutal, violent warfare for a protracted period of time. But on the other hand, their demographics are horrible and getting worse. Their economy is small and getting worse. They are an international pariah. You cannot use their currency. They are technologically backward. There really is just not much there. So putting all that together, the answer is, how strong of a country are they? I would argue they are a very weak country with a very powerful supply of nuclear weapons. Even on the energy front, the United States produces twice as much oil as the Russians do. Now, Russia is still, I think, the third or fourth largest producer in the world. I don't want to take this too far. But despite all the propaganda that the Russians are paying for in the United States, you need to understand this is a dying country. It is a dying society. It is a poor economy. It is a poor army. They are coasting on the fumes of the former glories of their prior generations, and they are just about out of those. All right, bye-bye.